Hello everyone, welcome to a session on UPSC Mains previous year's question analysis, previous year papers question analysis. In this video, we will be analyzing 2013 General Studies paper 3 questions. In this part, we will be covering questions from 1 to 15. So let us begin with the first question without any further delay. So the first question that was asked in GS paper 3 of 2013 is, with a consideration towards the strategy of inclusive growth, the new Companies Bill 2013 has indirectly made CSR a mandatory obligation. Discuss the challenges expected in its implementation. In right earnest, also discuss other provisions in the bill and their implication. First, you start by explaining what the Companies Bill of 2013 is, or the Companies Act of 2013 is. Then they are asking about the obligations, right? The provisions in the bill itself. What do they mean by the CSR being mandatory? CSR is corporate social responsibility. You have to explain why this bill makes it kind of mandatory, and you explain, are there any problems or are there any challenges in implementing this bill? That is how you approach this answer. Now moving on to question number 2. When you come to the question number 2, first thing is, what were the reasons for the introduction of Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management FRBM Act 2003? Discuss critically its salient features or silent features and their effectiveness. Again, like the earlier question, you start by explaining what FRBM Act of 2003 is. Then you talk about what the act salient features are. One of the best example to a source to learn salient features of an act is PRS legislative summary of a bill. Go through their website, download the summaries of each and every bill that a parliament passes through or that are tabled in parliament. Learn about the salient features from there. They are a good and effective source for these kinds of things, and you talk about how effective they are. Simple. The question itself has all the key points that you have to answer. Explain the bill, explain the salient features, explain the effectiveness of the bill. That's it. You are golden. But limit, 200 word limit is important. Now moving on to question number 3. Question number 3 is, what is the meaning of term tax expenditure? Question mark. Taking housing sector as an example, discuss how it influences the budgetary policies of the government. Now this is important. First, you have to explain or define the word or the meaning of the term tax expenditure. That is how you answer. You give the introduction of your answer with a definition of the term tax expenditure. Now they are asking specifically about housing sector. Now you link up the term tax expenditure with that of the housing sector, and you talk about the influences, the budgetary policies of the government are influences, right? You talk about the influences, how this particular terminology, how this particular tax expenditure kind of influences the budgetary policy of the government of India. That is how you approach this answer. Now moving on to question number 4. Food Security Bill is expected to eliminate hunger and malnutrition in India. Critically discuss various apprehensions in its effectiveness or effective implementation, along with the concerns it has generated in World Trade Organization. First, similarly explain what Food Security Bill is. 2. Explain the provisions of Food Security Bill, along with it the need for Food Security Bill. Finally, you conclude the answer by giving an overall comprehensive and simple analysis of the bill itself. You say whether it is functioning or it will help or not, whether it will have an impact or not. That is how you conclude this answer. Now moving on to the next question. Question number 5. What are the different types of agriculture subsidies given to farmers at the national and at the state levels? Critically analyze the agricultural subsidy regime with reference to distortions created by it. 200 words, 10 marks. So when the questions are asked in a comparative way, where you have to compare between two things, First, you start explaining the subsidies in the first place. What are subsidies, right? How are the subsidies? What types of subsidies that are being given, not only at the state level but also at the national level. Then you explain why there is this distortion that is taking place, factors that are resulting in this distortion, and you conclude your answer with a possible explanation whether how it is advantageous or disadvantageous. Now moving on to question number 6. India needs to strengthen measures to promote the pink revolution in food industry for ensuring better nutrition and health. Critically elucidate the statement, 200 words. First, explain what pink revolution is. Second, talk about how important pink revolution has been in bettering the nutrition and health of our citizen in our country. Then you talk about the measures under which, or the measures that are taken under the banner of pink revolution, and talk about whether they have been impactful or not. If they have been impactful, okay. If they have not been impactful, suggest some sort of a way forward. That would be a proper way to answer this question. Not all questions require you to give a possible solution. They are asking you to explain, elucidate whether it has been pink revolution is a success or not. You don't need to give a way forward in this regard. All you have to say is the measures that have taken under the pink revolution have functioned to a greater deal. Since they are asking the question, India needs to strengthen the measures, you have to conclude, you have to understand that the measures that are currently being undertaken are not enough to reach the goals of having or reach the goals of bettering nutrition and health of our citizenry. That is how you approach this answer. Now coming to question number 8, establish relationship between land reforms, agriculture productivity and the elimination of poverty in the Indian economy. Discuss the difficulties in designing and implementation of agricultural friendly land reforms in India. The land reform issue in India has been is fraught with a lot of pitfalls, because whenever the idea of land reforms have been floated, there has been a lot of resistance to this idea. Though there are many arguments in favor of having land reforms and implementing land reforms, for whatever reason, we know the reasons as to why these things are being opposed, but nonetheless land reforms, particularly agricultural friendly land reforms, have always been a challenge in our country. Now that is why you talk about implementation or the problems in implementing such land reforms in our country with greater significance. That is how you approach this question. Now moving on to question number 9a. Discuss the impact of FDI entry into multi-trade retail sector on supply chain management in commodity trade pattern of the economy. That is a mouthful question. So what are they asking for us in here? They are asking about, see, this is a 100-word limit question, so you have to be very specific and to the point. You don't have to beat around the bush to answer this question. First, they are saying that FDI, what has been the impact of FDI entry into multi-trade retail sector? First, you give us two example of the numbers of you give us possible numbers of FDI in multi-retail sector, particularly multi-trade retail sector, the investments amount, the total impact of it and all. Now you talk about the impact of this had on supply chain management in commodity trade. See, that is a word. First, talk numbers, then talk about are they impacting the supply chain management or not. Then you talk about how this multi-trade retail sector is going to change small shops in our country. Remember, multi-trade retail sector talks about having chains of supermarkets. Remember, this is like, to simply put, it's again supermarket versus kirana shop. That is how you approach this answer. Be very specific. Now moving on to the next part of the same question 9b. Though India allowed foreign direct investments in what is called multi-brand retail through the joint venture route in September 2012, the FDI even after a year has not picked up. Discuss the reasons. So this is the other side of the coin. We have announced a policy. Despite it being announced way back, we are not seeing any activity in that sector. So you have to talk about the rules that were laid out in the policy itself. What were the rules, right? There was this policy that we had where 51% ownership should be in the hands of an Indian entity, or the foreign companies can only own about 49% of the share, meaning they cannot own the majority stake. Indians must have the ownership of majority stake. That is one possible way. The second is also the tax that is being imposed on this thing, why it is problematic. The adoption is also one of the big things. Still today we are still dependent on that small shops. We are not that dependent on, particularly in rural areas, on that big supermarkets. We are still dependent on that kirana shop. So it also talks about the economy, the rollout, all these things. That is how we have to approach this question. Now moving on to question number 10. Discuss the rationale for introducing goods and services tax in India. Bring out critically the reasons for the delay in rollout of its regime. 200 words. First you talk about the goods and services tax. Then you explain what were the reasons as to why the government thought that a GST would be a good idea. You talk about the provisions, you talk about the benefits of GST or the rollout of GST. Then you talk about the pushback against the GST regime, and you explain the pushbacks in the as one of the reasons for the delay in implementing or delay in rollout also. So you have to combine your criticism with reasons for the delay of rollout GST regime in our country. That is how you approach this question. Coming to question number 11, write a note on India's green energy corridor to alleviate the problem of conventional energy. First, talk about what a green energy corridor is. Talk about the issues that India have with conventional energy sources. Talk about the final solution. That's how you approach this. Simply evaluate what are the problems that India has with conventional energy sources, how India can come out of this trap of being dependent on conventional energy sources. Moving on to the next, adoption of PPP model for infrastructure development of the country has not been free of criticism. Critically discuss pros and cons of the model. Simple. They have given the key points that they want you to answer. First, explain what PPP model is. Don't relegate yourself to infrastructure development alone. Give an example in infrastructure model, but explain what PPP model is. Now the second part of the question has not been free of criticism. Why people have been criticizing PPP model? Explain that. Finally, are there advantages to the PPP model? If so, elucidate some. All while explaining, you have to maintain stability, right? Equality. So you explain some negatives of PPP model also. That is how you answer this question. Now moving on to question number 13. Bringing out the circumstances in 2005 which forced amendment to the section 3D in Indian Patent Law 1970. Discuss how it has been utilized by the Supreme Court in its judgment in rejecting Novartis patent application for Glyvac. Discuss briefly the pros and cons of the decision. So first you have to talk about the amendment that was made to section 3D in Indian Patent Law of 1970. So you talk about the amendment of Patent Act in 2005, which was taken up in 2005. Now you talk about what section 3D is, and you have to explain the provisions of section 3D. That is how you expand your answer. Then you come to the Novartis problem. You explain what the Novartis problem is, and you explain what the impact of this amendment had on the Novartis problem. and you finally conclude the answer whether the amendment that was brought in 2005 to the Patent Act of 1970 has actually made any difference in the reality or actually made it worse for the companies to operate in our country. That is how you explain this answer. Now moving on to question number 14. What do you understand by fixed dose drug combination FDCs? Discuss their merits and demerits. FDCs, first you explain why what FDCs are. Now you also have to explain why FDCs are being implemented in the first place. You have to give scientific reason why these doses are predetermined, why fixed doses of drug combinations are being sold in the first place, and then you talk about are they advantages or disadvantages. That is how you explain, because in our country we don't get tailored medicines. In America, if you want a medicine, if you want a tablet, let us say you want a headache tablet. In order to have an headache tablet, in India you have to directly go to the medical shop and buy predetermined fixed dose drugs. Let us say compound A, compound B, compound C. A headache tablet in India has 3 components: component A, component B, component C. So you have predetermined, you have 20% of component A, 20% of component B, 20% of component C, or 15%, 20%, 20%, or 20%, 15%, 20%. All the components, all the combinations of components in a drug in India are predetermined. But in America or in US, when you want a specific drug, the doctor will decide what should be the combination of components in your headache medicine. Because you are a lean, thin person and you have certain health conditions underlyingly, you cannot handle 20% of compound A, 20% of compound B. So what the doctor will do is the doctor will write a prescription saying that this person will have 10% of this person's tablet will have 10% of component A, 5% of component B, and 20% of component C. When you go to the pharmaceutical shop, pharmacy in US, and you give that prescription, the pharmacist in that pharmacy will make a tablet for you with that dosage: 5% of component, 10% of component A, 5% of component B, and 20% of component C, specifically tailored to you so that you don't have any complications by taking that medicines. That are the disadvantages, because not everybody are drug resistant, in the sense can handle the doses of drugs. That are the disadvantages of having this predetermined or fixed dose drug control combinations in our country. That is how you give that answer, because it is a very interesting topic and you have to give an answer in that regard. Now coming to question number 15, what do you understand by umpire decision review system in cricket? Discuss its various components. Explain how silicone tape on the edge of a bat may fool the system. So first you have to talk about the DRS system, that is umpire decision review system. Now we have to explain what are the components of it also. Finally you talk about what the silicone tape does to the bat in terms of this whole thing. That is how you approach this answer. Please like the video. Please share the video among your friends and family. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to it. Turn on the notifications by clicking the bell icon so that you don't miss any new videos. Thanks for watching. Hope you have learned something new from this video. Thank you.